Played as a Western power, and even to some extent when you're raiding and pillaging as a beardy Norseman, Crusader Kings 2 is a game about careful, measured expansion. Sure, you can raise a ridiculously huge army of chevaliers as medieval France, but unless you have a justification for war, it's going to take you a while to spread your influence across the map. Forging relationships, keeping your vassals happy so that you can use their levy troops, and slowly building influence are key. It's about readying yourself politically and militarily for the perfect strike. If you find all that a bit too much of a hassle, playing as a nomadic faction in the new Horse Lords DLC will be pretty much perfect for you. Nomadic tribes, represented most famously by Genghis Khan and his steppe warrior hordes, don't believe in all that vassal nonsense, nor do they care for the fortresses and temples of those weak westerners. All they need is the open plain, the bow, and their loyal steed. As you might expect, this makes them incredibly mobile. You've only got one holding to worry about, your capital, which can be shifted to a new province with ease. Other than that, it's pretty much open plains that you want to secure, not new cities and castles. Nomadic rulers rely on two new resources, population and manpower. The former is the sheer number of subjects in your empire. You require space, land for your people to farm, and the more of the map you cover in your colours, the more warriors you'll be able to bring to bear against the enemy. That's where manpower, a concept that players of Europa Universalis 4 will be pretty familiar with, comes in. Manpower, a percentage of your total population, takes the place of levy armies for nomadic tribes, representing a slowly building resource pool that could be directly spent, along with prestige, on new retinues of deadly horse archers and cavalry. This essentially means that nomadic rulers can field huge standing armies while paying almost no maintenance. Your people are hardy plains riders after all, not soft European peasants. Give them a bow, the promise of plunder and a respected leader to follow, and they'll turn up in their thousands to fight for you. Manpower is quite slow to build up, so you will have to be careful you're not ambushed by a larger force and destroyed, but from the start you'll be able to bring more numbers to the field than any other government type. This makes playing an expansive, aggressive game far more viable. Perhaps a little too viable, unless one of those classic Crusader Kings curveballs, a hugely powerful rival declaring war for some random reason, a death in the family, or rampant syphilis, hits you in the early game, you rapidly become so powerful that pushing into Europe or east through India becomes a bit of a breeze. You can raid and pillage foreign cities, even those that you've already claimed as part of your empire, for stacks of gold and technology points, with only a moderate increase to the chance of a rebellion as a result. Rebels can be an issue, but as long as you keep a stack of troops handy to fend off any that spring up, they'll never really become more than a distracting irritant. The end result? Stacks of cash, hordes of troops, and only a few real powers in the game that can oppose you. Don't get me wrong, it is fun to indulge your warmongering side, but CK2 players looking for a tough challenge won't really find that here. Still, the flavourful new events and systems for nomadic rulers make for an enjoyable new take on the game's established formula. Rather than dozens of different vassals, you have a number of powerful clans to keep on side. Fail to provide them with appropriate land and plunder, and they'll rise up to challenge you for overall control of the horde. You can sign one blood pact with a single clan, a special ritual treaty that for all intents and purposes assures that clan support, but everyone else will be eyeing your piles of gold jealousy. I did find the clans easier to fob off than vassals once I gathered enough prestige, but when your elderly scourge of the steppes eventually dies and you're left with some idiot son that absolutely nobody respects, it's probably time to start worrying. Fortunately, you can prepare your progeny by sending him off to fight as a mercenary. He'll travel across the world with his retinue, gaining fame and loot of his own, and then you can even recall him back to help you out if you find yourself short of troops. In nomadic factions, it's each candidate's sheer fame and prestige that determines who the clans pick as your successor, so encouraging a healthy and varied education for your sons, and having a ton of them just to be sure, is key to the future of your grand empire. For those of you who prefer to avoid burning down absolutely everything in sight, you can try your hand at more mercantile pursuits with the introduction of the Silk Road. This was the historical trade route that wound its way from the Mediterranean through the east towards China. For the first time, land-based powers of all government types can mess around with the trade outpost mechanics that were previously reserved for naval merchant republics like Venice. It's a smart addition that expands a previously fairly niche style of play, and it comes with a load of nefarious new events and decisions, such as paying a mob off to burn an opponent's lucrative trade depot to the ground. Land trade zones, unsurprisingly, are far easier to raid and interfere with than merchant ports, so it's much more viable to throw an opponent's economy off the rails by hitting them where their wallet is. Horse Lords might not change the state of play in CK2 quite as radically as previous expansions. Old Gods is always the standard for me, with its new start date, pagan factions and major new religion mechanics, but it nevertheless does a great job of injecting a bit more variety into the game. The Nomadic factions feel totally different than anything you've played before, and they're great for players who love to blob the map but find Western politicking a bit too fiddly. They will perhaps be a little on the easy side for experienced players, but there's still plenty of flavourful new events and mechanics to play with, and expanded opportunities to experiment with trade outposts thanks to the addition of the Silk Road. Overall, this is another great excuse to return to CK2. It scores a very respectable 8 out of 10. For more from GameWatcher, please subscribe to our YouTube channel below, or follow us on Twitter at GameWatcherCom.